This flight line is closed to civilians, sweetheart. How dare you set foot on my ramp? Move, or I move you." The words came before the woman had both boots on the tarmac. They came before the transport's engines had finished spooling down, while the heat off the ramp still bent the air into water that was not there. Staff Sergeant Shane Petrie stood at the foot of the loading ramp, with his hands on his hips and his chin out, and he said them loud enough for the whole arrivals detail to hear, because an audience was the point. It was 1300 hours on a flat, bright afternoon at an air delivery wing, 94 degrees on the tarmac, and hotter than that on the concrete, where the sun had been cooking the ramp since sunrise. 4 aircraft sat on the pads in a row, gray whales with their ramps down and their bellies open, and around them moved the ordered chaos of a flight line at work. Tow tractors, fuel trucks, pallet loaders, the constant flat scream of auxiliary power units. It is one of the most dangerous stretches of ground in the peacetime military. A flight line, a place where a loose bolt, or a slack chain, or a low fire bottle is not a paperwork problem, but a way for young people to die in front of their friends. It is a place that lives or dies on standards. And standards were exactly what Shane Petrie had decided, somewhere in the last year of being a little bit in charge of a little bit of it, that he no longer had to keep for anyone but himself. She did not answer. She was maybe 2 steps from the bottom of the ramp, a plain gray flight suit on her, no rank on the collar, no name that anyone could read at a glance, a small black folio held flat against her thigh. She looked at him for 1 second. Then she looked past him, at the flight line, the way a person looks at a room they intend to stay in. That 1 second was the thing Petrie could not forgive. To him, it read as insolence, a civilian who did not scurry, a woman who did not flinch. He crossed the last of the distance in 3 strides, planted his left boot, and drove the sole of his right into the side of her hip. The boot landed. She did not. She went down the last 2 feet of the ramp and onto the concrete, one hand slapping flat to catch the fall, the folio skidding a yard across the tarmac. And in the half-second she was down, her eyes were not on Petrie. They were on a tie-down chain hanging slack off the cargo deck, and on the dark bloom of a fuel weep spreading under the No. 2 engine, the 2 most dangerous things on that flight line, catalogued before she had even stood back up. "Sergeant?" A single word, off to the left, hard as a dropped wrench. Gunnery Sergeant Owen Traeger was already coming across the tarmac at a pace that was not quite a run and was not anything less. 44 years old and built like a man who had spent 20 of them loading aircraft. "Petrie, off her." Lance Corporal Emmett Doyle got there first. 20 years old, 6 months on the flight line, he had lunged the moment the boot connected without deciding to, and now he had her forearm in both hands and was hauling her upright with the panicked care of someone who has just watched a thing he cannot unwatch. Ma'am, I've got you. I'm sorry. I've got you." "You're fine," she said. 2 words. Her voice was low and even and entirely without weather in it. She came up off the concrete in one clean motion, no wince, no hand to the hip, and stood. Petrie laughed. It was for the detail, that laugh. 3 or 4 Marines standing by the tow tractor with their eyebrows up. "Relax, Doyle. Crowd control. She's not on my manifest. She's not my problem." He turned back to her and jerked a thumb at the perimeter. "You want to file a complaint? There's a number. Right now. You're walking off my ramp before I have you walked off." She brushed the grit off one knee of the flight suit. Unhurried, she looked at the tail number of the transport she had just stepped off of, 6 digits, and read it once, top to bottom, the way you read something you are going to write down later. Then she looked at the name tape on Petrie's chest. Petrie, block letters, dead center, and read that too. Doyle was still holding her forearm as if letting go might drop her a second time. He was breathing hard, harder than she was, and his eyes kept flicking to Petrie and back to her, doing math a 20-year-old should not have to do. The math of a young Marine who has just watched his own detail leader do a thing that is wrong, and who does not yet have the rank or the nerve to say so out loud. She felt the tremor in his hands, and she reached up and very briefly put her own hand over his, steadying him, not herself. "You can let go now," she said. "You did fine." He let go. He stepped back, and he watched her stand there, filthy at one knee, utterly unbothered. And he thought, he would tell Traeger this later, and Traeger would only nod, that she had absorbed a boot to the hip the way a wall absorbs a thrown pebble, as a fact about the pebble and not about the wall. She did not pick the folio up herself. Doyle scrambled for it and put it in her hands, and she took it with a nod that was almost gentle. Then she turned away from Petrie entirely, as if he had finished being relevant, and started walking the flight line. That was the first thing. She turned her back on the man who had just kicked her, and she walked toward the fuel weep under the No. 2 engine like it was the reason she had come. Because it was. Nobody who has run a flight line for 30 years walks it the way a lost person walks it. A lost person drifts. Their eyes go to signs and doors and other people's faces, looking for permission. Frances Devereaux did not drift. She moved down the load yard in a straight line at a fixed pace, and her eyes went to the things that could kill a crew. And she named them, out loud, in a shorthand that no contractor and no reporter and no lost civilian has ever had in their mouth. Tie-downs rigged backward, she said, to no one, to the air, to the chain hanging slack off the cargo deck. Chains rated 10,000 pounds. Somebody ran it to 5 and called it good. That's not a load. That's a suggestion. She crouched, took the chain in one bare hand, and put a quarter turn of tension on the ratchet by feel, not looking at it, feeling for the bite. There. Now it's a load. 8 feet away, Traeger had stopped walking. He had come out onto that tarmac to pull his staff sergeant off a civilian and defuse an incident. And instead, he was standing very still, watching a woman in an unmarked flight suit call a misrigged restraint by its rated capacity and correct it by touch. He had heard that vocabulary in exactly one kind of person in his career, and it was not the kind that got kicked off ramps. Traeger had spent 26 years around aircraft. He knew the difference between a person who had read a manual and a person who had bled on the thing the manual was about. Civilians who wander onto flight lines do a specific set of things. They stop too close to intakes. They walk under wings without looking up. They reach out to touch what they should not touch. This woman had done none of it. She had stepped off the ramp and immediately put 20 feet between herself and the No. 2 intake without appearing to think about it, the way you step around furniture in your own house in the dark. She had checked the sky and the pad and the fuel truck's grounding strap in 3 flicks of her eyes before she said a word. Her stillness wasn't the stillness of a person who does not know what to do. It was the stillness of a person who has already decided and is simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to a decision she made in the first 2 seconds. 26 years, and Owen Traeger could count on one hand the number of people he had met who carried themselves like that, and every one of them had been the most dangerous person in whatever room they were standing in. Fuel weep No. 2 nacelle, she went on, moving. Somebody's going to police call this deck in about 10 minutes and walk right through it with a lit cutting torch on the next pad over. FODs everywhere. There's a safety wire and 2 rivets loose by the chalk line. That's a turbine's lunch. She said turbine's lunch the way a mechanic says it, flat, a joke worn smooth by 1,000 repetitions. You. Petrie again, catching up, his voice climbing now because the detail was watching her and not him. You don't touch equipment on my flight line. Escort. Now. Get her to the visitor center and log her out. The escort could not log her out. That was the small, quiet, expanding problem that Petrie had not yet understood. A Marine trotted off to the visitor center and came back 4 minutes later with a clipboard and a confused face, because there was no visitor by that description in the log, no gate pass, no sponsor, no vehicle. She had not come through a gate. She had come in on the aircraft. And the only place a person's name lives when they arrive on a controlled military aircraft is the crew and passenger manifest, which does not hang on a hook at the visitor center. It comes down from the tower. She's not in the system, the Marine said. It should have been the moment Petrie stopped. A stranger who is not in any visitor log, who did not come through any gate, who stepped off a controlled military aircraft onto a restricted flight line, is not a person you have caught. She is a person who was cleared to be there by an authority higher than the gate, because that is the only way a human being gets onto that concrete without a pass. Every instinct a careful NCO has should have lit up at once. I am missing something. Find out what before you act. Traeger's had. That is the difference between the two men, and it is the whole difference. Traeger heard, not in the system, and reached for the tower. Petrie heard, not in the system, and reached for the most convenient story that let him keep being right. Then she's a trespasser, Petrie said, and something in him relaxed, because trespasser was a word he knew how to use. Write it up. Traeger keyed his radio. He did it quietly, half turned away, the way a man does a thing he does not want an argument about. Tower, ramp 6. Pull me the manifest on the inbound. Tail number ending 731. Crew and packs. All names. A pause. The tower is never in a hurry. Then the answer came back into Traeger's earpiece, and Gunnery Sergeant Owen Traeger, 44 years old, 3 combat deployments, a man who did not rattle, went very quiet at what he heard. They gave her a name by the end of the first hour, and it was not her name. It was the Ramp Tourist. Petrie coined it, and a couple of the detail took it up, and one of them, a corporal with a phone he should not have had out on the flight line, started filming her walk the hangar apron and narrating it in a low voice for whoever he thought would find it funny later. The Ramp Tourist. Look at her. Thinks she works here. Devereaux let it happen. This is the part that the men filming her would never understand until it was far too late. She was not enduring the mockery. She was using the time. Every minute they spent building a nickname was a minute she spent building an inspection. There is a discipline in it that most people do not have and cannot fake. When someone mocks you in front of a crowd, the body wants to answer, to explain, to correct, to produce the credential that would end it. I am not what you think I am. Look at what I really am. That impulse is human, and it is almost always a mistake, because the moment you reach for the credential, you have handed the other person the shape of the fight. Devereaux never reached for it. She had spent 30 years learning that the credential is strongest when it is produced by someone else, at the last possible moment, when it can no longer be argued with. Until then, the smartest thing a powerful person can do is keep working and let the small man dig. So she kept working. She let him dig. And the hole got deeper every time somebody laughed. They blockaded the hangar personnel door on her. Petrie posted Doyle on it. Nobody unauthorized through this door, and told her to wait outside in the heat. And she said, "Understood," in that same weatherless voice, and stood there, in the full sun, at a tension that did not look like attention, at ease that did not look like ease. And she read. Through the wire glass window of the hangar door, taped at eye level on the inside, was the fire suppression inspection card for the bay. Devereaux read it through the glass. She read the last inspected date. She read the initials. And she noted, without a muscle moving in her face, that the card had been signed off as current on a date that was 3 months in the future of the last time anyone had actually opened the extinguisher cabinet, because the cabinet's own tamper seal was intact and yellowed and older than the card claimed, a small lie taped to a door, the kind of small lie that a fire finds first. And she waited in 94 degrees of sun for 40 minutes and did not ask for water, and did not shift her weight, and did not give Petrie the one thing he was starving for, which was a reaction. A lesser antagonist might have let it go. Petrie could not, because a person who will not react is a mirror, and Shane Petrie did not like what the mirror showed him, and so he kept coming back to break it. Doyle stood his post and hated it. He was 20. He had been on the flight line for 6 months, and he had already learned the thing they do not put in the manual, which is that the worst orders are the ones that are technically lawful and entirely wrong. He watched the woman stand in the heat and read a door, and he leaned in close to Petrie at the changeover and said the only brave thing he would say that afternoon. "Staff Sergeant, she's not. She's not acting like a lost civilian. Lost civilians argue, or they cry, or they leave. She's just reading everything." "She's stalling," Petrie said, without looking at him. "They always stall. Get back on the door, Doyle." Doyle got back on the door. Here is a hard truth this channel keeps circling back to, and if it makes you want to do something about it, there is a button below this video that costs you nothing and tells the algorithm a story like this deserves to be seen. The people who abuse a little authority are almost never stopped by the people watching. They are stopped by the one moment they finally overreach in front of the one person they cannot afford to have watching. Petrie was walking toward that moment with his chin out. He just could not see it yet. Petrie decided to win it on paper. This is what men like Petrie do when the ground starts to feel wrong under them. They reach for the form. He went into the arrivals office, sat down at the terminal, and began to write an unauthorized access incident report. And he wrote it the way a coward writes, which is to say he wrote a story in which he was brave. In his version, she had breached a controlled aircraft movement area. In his version, she had refused lawful instruction. In his version, she had resisted, which was the word he chose for the fact that she had not fallen the way he wanted her to fall. She watched him do it through the office window, composed, the folio flat against her thigh, and she did not stop him. Of course she did not stop him. A man writing down a false account of events in his own hand, with his own name at the bottom, in an official system with a time stamp, is not a threat to her. He is a gift to the inspection. There is an old rule that the best inspectors live by, and it is this: never interrupt a unit that is showing you the truth about itself. Petrie thought he was covering his tracks. What he was actually doing was producing, in writing, under his own signature, a permanent record of exactly the mindset that had made his flight line unsafe. A leader who, confronted with a stranger on his ramp, reached first for force, then for a lie, and never once for the standard. Devereaux did not need to catch him in a trap. She only needed to hold still and let him narrate himself into one. Every keystroke he made was a keystroke she would not have to type into her own report because he was writing hers for her. Then he made it worse, the way panic always makes it worse. He ordered a fast police call of the flight line. Get this deck cleaned up, all hands now. And the reason he gave was pride, but the effect was tampering. He was sending Marines to sweep away the exact foreign object debris and hose off the exact fuel weep that she had already logged, before the real inspection he assumed was coming later in the week could see it. He thought he was cleaning his flight line. He was destroying the evidence of his own flight line, and he was doing it in front of the officer who had already recorded all of it. While they swept, she waited by the fire bottle rack at the edge of the apron, and she did the thing with her hands that Traeger had already learned to watch for. She rested one palm flat on the top of the nearest wheeled extinguisher, the big 1,000-pound rated bottle they keep near the pads, and she read its gauge by the tremor of the needle under her thumb, and felt it sitting low, under pressure, a fire bottle that would cough and die in the first 10 seconds of the fire it existed to fight. She did not announce it. She filed it on the running list, item after item, the flight line telling on itself. Traeger had the manifest now, folded once in his breast pocket, and he could not make himself unknow what was on it. He came up alongside Petrie at the terminal and spoke low and fast. "Staff Sergeant, stop writing! Delete it! Walk out there and apologize to that woman before this gets bigger than you can carry." Petrie read the gunny's tone as weakness. That was his last real mistake, though it would take him another hour to understand it. "You going soft, Gunny? She kicked this off. I'm covering the detail." He hit submit. The incident report went into the system with a timestamp and a name in the reporting block, and the name of the trespasser, typed into the subject line in Petrie's own careful capitals, was a name that Traeger had read off the tower manifest 20 minutes earlier and had not been able to say out loud since. Traeger tried one more time, off to the side, out of earshot of the detail, because he was a professional, and professionals give a man every exit before they stop trying. Shane. First name. That got Petrie's attention more than any rank would have. I'm going to say this once. Clean. If that woman is who the manifest says she is, you do not want one more minute of this on the record. You walk out there. You pick up her folio if it's on the ground. You say the words. And maybe this ends as the worst afternoon of your career instead of the last one. Do you understand me? Who does the manifest say she is? Petrie said, and it was almost a sneer. Almost. But there was a hairline crack in it now. Traeger looked at him for a long moment. He thought about saying the name. He had it, folded in his pocket, and one word would have ended the whole afternoon. Would have dropped Petrie to his knees on the spot. And he decided not to, and it was not cowardice, it was a colder thing than that. Traeger had figured out, standing there, that the woman in the flight suit had chosen not to reveal herself, and that a gunnery sergeant who stepped on that choice was making a mistake of his own. She was running something. He did not fully understand it yet, but he understood enough to stay out of the way of it. So he gave Petrie the exit, watched him refuse it, and stepped back. Then he shook his head, once, and walked away. Because there are men you cannot save from themselves, and the only mercy left is to not be standing next to them when it lands. Out on the apron, Devereaux finished her walk of the hangar. She did it the way she did everything. Straight line, fixed pace, hands reading what her eyes marked. 3 fire extinguishers with inspection tags that had lapsed by more than a year. An emergency exit at the rear of the bay chained shut from the inside. Chained on a fire exit in a building full of fuel and hydraulic fluid. A forklift parked in the ready line with a red condition tag zip-tied to its wheel. Red meaning down, red meaning do not operate. And a set of fresh scuff marks on its forks that said somebody had been operating it all week anyway. She counted them the way her father had taught her to count welds, without heat, one after another. A rosary of small betrayals of the people who worked under this roof. 9 findings by the time she reached the back wall. 9 ways this hangar had quietly agreed, over months, to stop keeping the promises that kept its Marines alive. And not one of them was the fault of the 20-year-olds who worked here. Every one of them traced upward, to a place where someone with a little authority had decided that the standard was optional, and had taught everyone below them, by example, that it was optional too. That was the real finding. The fire cards and the chained exit and the red-tagged forklift were only symptoms. The disease was a leader who had forgotten that his rank was a debt and not a trophy, and she had met the disease face first at the bottom of a ramp before she had read a single card. She was not collecting grievances. A grievance is about a man. She was building an inspection, and an inspection is about 100 small failures that add up to a funeral nobody has had yet. Across the field, in the wing headquarters, a phone rang on the desk of Colonel Bennett Rowe. Rowe was 51, the base chief of staff, and he had spent the better part of the afternoon at a reception line by the wrong hangar, waiting to receive an inspecting officer who had, per the plan he had been read into, and almost no one else had, arrived without ceremony, on a routine transport, precisely so that she would see the base as it actually was. The reception line had produced no general. The aircraft had landed 40 minutes ago, and the officer was not answering the number he had for her, because the officer was standing in the sun reading a fire card through a window and had turned her phone face down in her thigh pocket on purpose. "Tower," Rose said into the phone, standing up now, already reaching for his cover. "Who signed for the inbound tail 731? Who met the aircraft?" A pause. His face changed. "Say again the reporting block on that incident report that just crossed. Say the subject name." Another pause, longer. Colonel Bennett Rowe closed his eyes for 1 second, the way a man does when he can see, all at once, exactly how bad a thing is going to be. And then he started walking, fast, toward the flight line, and he did not stop to explain himself to anyone he passed. 22 years earlier, on a different flight line, in a different country, a captain named Frances Devereaux had run the wrong way. She was 31 that year. A transport lost an engine on takeoff, came back down hard and short, and slid off the end of the runway with a full load and a full tank. And by the time she reached it, the ramp was already a furnace, the big rear ramp down and gaping, and inside it a red throat of fire, and the heat coming off it in a wall you could lean against. The book says you do not go up a burning ramp. The book is right. The book is written by people who were not standing there when the screaming started. She went up it anyway. She would tell no one, for years, how she made her feet do that. There was no decision in it that she could ever find afterward, no brave thought, no flag-waving line. There was only the arithmetic that her whole life had been quietly teaching her, which is that a ramp is a place people are trusting you to have inspected, and the trust does not end, because the aircraft is on fire. It ends when you stop climbing. She had come up in a family that did not talk about feelings, and did talk, endlessly, about doing the job in front of you. Her father had been a boilermaker, who lost 2 fingers to a job done wrong by someone else, and spent the rest of his life checking other men's welds without being asked, and she had inherited the whole of him, the flat effect, the busy hands, the private conviction that the difference between a good day and a catastrophe is almost always some small, boring thing that somebody could have caught and did not. She had joined the Marine Corps at 22, not because she wanted to be a hero. She had joined because the Marine Corps was the largest organization she had ever found that agreed with her father. That standards are not bureaucracy, that standards are love with its sleeves rolled up, that the checklist is how you tell the people under you that you intend for them to go home. She went up 3 times. The first 2 times she came down with a man over each shoulder, gloves smoking, and put them in the grass, and turned around, and went back up, while people shouted her name and meant stop. The 3rd time she went up for the crew chief. His name was Neil Corrigan. He was 24. He was pinned under a shifted pallet at the top of the ramp, conscious, calm in the way the bravest ones get calm, and he talked to her the whole time she worked to free him, told her the load plan, of all things, told her which chain to cut first so the pallet would roll off him and not onto him, a crew chief running his own rescue by the numbers, because that was the only thing he had left to give. She got the chain, she got the pallet, she got her hands on him, and the fire got the rest of the ramp before she could get him to the light. And there is a moment, a single moment, that Francis Devereaux has carried for 22 years, where she felt his hand close on her wrist and then loosen, not because he let go, but because he ran out of the thing that lets a hand hold on. She came down the ramp the third time with nothing over her shoulders, and her gloves melted to her palms, and she did not scream, and she did not weep. Not there. She stood in the grass, and she watched the ramp burn, and she made herself a promise that she has never once said aloud, and the promise was this: I will read every ramp for the rest of my life, the way I didn't get to read that one. The investigation afterward found the cause, the way investigations always do, weeks too late to matter. A maintenance step skipped, a component signed off as inspected that had not been inspected, a card on a wall with initials on it, and a date that was a lie. Not sabotage, not malice. Just a standard quietly not kept by someone who had decided, one ordinary afternoon, that the boring thing did not apply to him today. Neil Corrigan died of someone else's shortcut. That is the sentence that has lived behind Francis Devereaux's sternum for 22 years. And it is the sentence that was standing on the tarmac this afternoon, when a staff sergeant signed off a fire card 3 months into the future and kicked the inspector who noticed. They gave her a medal for going up the ramp. She wore it exactly once to the ceremony, because her mother asked her to, and then she put it in a drawer, because a medal for a rescue is a strange and terrible object. It marks the day you saved 2 and could not save the 3rd, and there is no ribbon in any color that makes that arithmetic come out even. What she kept instead was the habit. The habit was the memorial. The habit was checking a fire bottle by feel, while a man called her a tourist, because somewhere there was a 24-year-old crew chief whose whole life came down to whether the person walking the ramp that day actually looked. That is why she checks fire bottles by feel. That is why she reads a card through a door. That is why a lapsed extinguisher tag is not a paperwork error to her, but the front edge of a coffin. People think an inspector is a person who enjoys finding fault. An inspector is a person who has already been to the funeral that the fault leads to, and has decided to keep other people from that particular room. She had signed the front page of the folio an hour ago in the plain flight suit on the tarmac, while a staff sergeant called her a tourist, and the trap around Shane Petrie had closed the moment ink met paper. He simply had not been told yet. Petrie crossed the bright line for the last time at the hangar door, and he did it in front of enough witnesses to make it a matter of permanent record. She had come back to the personnel door to go inside. The inspection required it, and she was done waiting on his permission. Doyle, on the door, stepped aside for her without being told, because Doyle's instincts had been right for an hour, and he was finally going to trust one. And Petrie, seeing it, seeing his own private authority evaporate at his own door, lost the last of the thread. He came off the wall and snatched the folio out of her hands, grabbed it, tore it out of her grip, and put his other palm flat on her shoulder and shoved her back a full step from the door. Here is the thing about Francis Devereaux that Shane Petrie had never once considered in the whole long afternoon he spent underestimating her. She could have ended him physically at any second she chose. A woman who carries 2 grown men down a burning ramp on her shoulders does not lack the means to handle a staff sergeant at a hangar door. She had spent the afternoon absorbing his hands, not because she could not answer them, but because answering them was beneath the thing she had come to do. Every operator learns, eventually, that restraint is not the absence of force. Restraint is force under discipline, force that has somewhere better to be. The most dangerous person on that flight line had let a smaller man put hands on her twice, on purpose, because she understood something he never would. That the story was not going to be settled by whose body won. It was going to be settled by the record, and the record was almost finished writing itself. She did not brace. She did not swing. This is the tell. The same tell it had been all afternoon. The one Traeger had learned to read, and Petrie never would. When the shove came, Frances Devereaux let go. She let the folio go into his hand. She let her shoulder go with the push instead of against it. One clean step back, balanced, unbothered. A woman declining a fight she had already won by other means. And the folio, snatched too hard, flapped open in Petrie's grip, and its front page fell forward. And the whole world got to read the header. Doyle read it. Traeger, crossing back toward them, read it. The header was 3 lines. Printed, official. And the top line was a sealed inspection classification. And the second line was a name and a rank. And the rank wasn't a rank that belonged anywhere near the word tourist. Devereaux looked at Petrie then, and for the first time all afternoon, she smiled. It was a small thing, level and cool, no teeth in it, the smile of a person who has reached the end of a long and tiresome errand. She let the silence sit for 1 beat. 2. Pick it up, she said. Petrie, still running on the fumes of his own authority, still not reading the room, still furious, bent to grab the folio off the floor where it had fallen open, meaning to throw it, meaning one more gesture of contempt, and on the way down, he read the top line. Colonel Bennett Rowe reached the hangar door. At the moment, Petrie was still bent over, one hand on the fallen folio, the blood going out of his face. Rowe took it in at a glance. The woman standing straight and calm in an unmarked flight suit, the staff sergeant crouched at her feet over an open folio, the detail frozen in a loose horseshoe. And Rowe did the thing that told everyone watching, more than any shout could have, exactly what was happening. He stopped. He came to attention himself, a full colonel, and then he stepped forward, and he crouched, and he took the folio gently out from under Petrie's hand. He closed it. He straightened, and he turned and offered it back to the woman in the flight suit with both hands, the way you return a sword, the way you return something that was never yours to hold. Major General Devereaux. His voice carried, flat and clear, and it was not loud, but it did not need to be, because the flight line had gone the kind of quiet where a dropped bolt would have rung like a bell. The wing is ready for your inspection, ma'am. My apologies for the reception. The word moved through the detail like cold water finding a low place. General. General. You could watch it land. You could watch it reach the corporal with the phone, who very slowly lowered the phone. You could watch it reach the escort who had gone looking for her in the visitor log. You could watch it reach Shane Petrie, still crouched, and climb his spine one vertebra at a time. His face did the whole journey. First the confusion, a flicker, a squint, the brain refusing the word because the word did not fit the flight suit. Then the disbelief, the small denying shake of the head. No. She came off a routine transport. She had no rank. This is a mistake. Then the recognition, the terrible arrival of it, the folio header and the colonel's bearing and the manifest and the gunny's warnings all slamming together into a single unbearable fact. And last, the horror, the pure animal horror of a man who has just understood that the thing he did in front of witnesses, with a camera running, he did to a 2-star general who had come to inspect him. You could see in his face the afternoon replaying itself against the one fact that reorganized all of it. The kick, the word sweetheart, the nickname he had coined, and the crowd he had gathered to hear it. The incident report he had typed with her name in the subject line and his own name in the reporting block. Submitted, time-stamped, undeletable. The order to sweep away the very hazards she had already logged. The second shove, at the door. 30 seconds ago, in front of his own chief of staff. Every single thing he had done to make himself bigger this afternoon had been, without his knowing it, a stone he was stacking on his own chest. And now, the whole cairn came down at once. He had not disrespected a lost civilian. He had assembled, with his own 2 hands, and remarkable thoroughness, the complete case against Staff Sergeant Shane Petrie, and he had handed it, gift-wrapped, to the one person on Earth with both the authority and the reason to open it. Nobody saluted. You do not salute on an active flight line under turning props and rotor wash, and every professional there knew it. What happened instead was quieter, and, if you have ever worn the uniform, worse. The entire arrivals detail came to a still, correct attention where they stood, each Marine locking up in place, eyes front, because the body knows what to do with a general, even when the mind is still screaming. A field of Marines gone rigid and silent around one crouched man who could not make his legs work. Devereaux took the folio from Roe with a small nod. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised it once all afternoon, and she was not going to start now that she had won. Staff Sergeant Petrie. She said his name the way she had read it off his chest an hour ago, filed and retrieved. You're relieved of the arrivals detail. Report to your gunnery sergeant and stand by. Petrie got to his feet. His mouth opened. Whatever was in it, an explanation, an apology, a plea, the first word of the long, useless speech that men make when the floor opens, it did not matter, because Major General Francis Devereaux had already turned away from him, folio in hand, toward the flight line she had come a very long way to inspect. What came next was not a spectacle, and that was the point. That is the part the men who film these things never expect. There is a version of this afternoon that ends with Shane Petrie in handcuffs, marched off the flight line in front of the camera, a court-martial convened, an investigation announced, careers falling like dominoes. Devereaux could have had that version with a sentence. She was a 2-star general. She had been assaulted twice by an NCO in front of witnesses and a recording, and no board on Earth would have blinked. That version would have felt good for about a day. She had been to enough funerals to know exactly how little a satisfying day is worth. There is a kind of leader who believes that punishment is the same thing as improvement, and the flight line was full of the wreckage that kind of leader leaves behind, because Shane Petrie, too, had believed in punishment, had believed that fear was a management tool, had run his corner of the world on it. Devereaux had spent 30 years watching what fear-run units actually produce, and what they produce is not safety. They produce silence. They produce 20-year-olds who see the chained fire exit and say nothing, who notice the low bottle and log it as full, because logging it as low means a conversation with a man who kicks people. The chained exit and the future-dated fire card were not accidents in spite of Petrie's hardness. They were products of it. A frightened flight line is an unsafe flight line, every time, and the fastest way to make it more unsafe is to bring in a bigger, angrier authority and frighten everyone worse. She was not going to give this flight line one more thing to be afraid of. She was going to give it a standard, and a reason to trust that the standard would protect them instead of hunt them. So she ran her inspection instead. She walked the flight line and the hangar with Colonel Rowe at her shoulder, and a clipboard that now had an official weight behind it, and every small failure she had catalogued while they called her a tourist became a finding, and every finding became a fix. The 3 lapsed fire extinguishers were pulled and replaced before the sun was down. The under-pressure 1,000-pound bottle went off the line, and a charged one took its place. The chained fire exit was cut open, and the chain thrown in a bin, and a work order cut so it would never be chained again. The red-tagged forklift, the one somebody had been running all week, was towed off the ready line. The backward tie-down chains got re-rigged to spec, The arrival standard operating procedure, the one that had let a staff sergeant decide on his own who was and was not a human being on his ramp, got flagged for a full rewrite, with Rowe's signature block already on the change. If any part of you has ever fixed the thing instead of just punishing the person, and had somebody tell you that you were being too soft, this is the video that says you were right, and there is a subscribe button below that agrees with you. Petrie she handled the way she had decided to handle him the moment she stood up off that concrete, quietly and permanently, and without giving him the dignity of a dramatic ending. He was relieved of the detail on the spot, which everyone saw. He was put on report, which the record would carry. And then, this was the part that undid him more thoroughly than any brig ever could have. He was sent back through the exact retraining pipeline whose standards he had skipped, the flight line safety and conduct course for junior Marines, to be run through it by Gunnery Sergeant Owen Traeger, the man who had begged him to walk it back. Shane Petrie would spend the next several weeks relearning, from the bottom, the standards he had been too important to keep, on the flight line of the general he had kicked, under the gunny he had called soft. He would have to live here. He would have to work here. Every day. Under all of it. Devereaux had decided that was more useful than a headline, and she was almost never wrong about what was useful. She said one thing to him, and only one, before she was done with him. She found him standing by the arrivals office where Traeger had put him, and she did not tower over him, and she did not raise her voice, and what she said was not a threat. You had a bad flight line, Staff Sergeant, and you decided the answer was to be feared on it. I'm going to show your Marines a different answer. You're going to learn it standing in their line. She let that sit. If, at the end of it, you keep a standard, because it keeps a 19-year-old alive, and not because I'm watching, then this afternoon will have been worth something. That's the most I can offer you, and it's more than you gave the woman on your ramp. Take it. Whether he took it, whether Shane Petrie became a better Marine or merely a quieter one, the story does not promise you. Real ones rarely resolve that cleanly, and the honest version leaves it in his hands, where it belongs. What the story promises you is the flight line, which was safer at sundown than it had been at noon. That much she could guarantee. The rest was up to him. She found Doyle at dusk, at the edge of the apron, still not sure whether he was in trouble. Lance Corporal, he snapped to. She looked at him for a second, the same second she had spent on Petrie at the bottom of the ramp, except this time what she filed was worth keeping. When the boot landed this afternoon, one person on this flight line moved the right way. That was you. You caught someone you thought was a nobody, and you didn't check her rank first, because it didn't occur to you to. Hold on to that. It's the whole job. Most people lose it. Don't. Yes, ma'am, Doyle said, and there was something in his face that he would still have when he was 44 and running a flight line of his own. He would tell this story then, to his own young Marines, and he would leave out the general's rank until the very end, the way she had taught him without meaning to, because the point of the story was never the 2 stars. The point of the story was the second before he knew about them, when a person he thought was nobody went down on the concrete, and he moved anyway. That second was the whole of it. That second was the Marine Corps, when it was working. She signed the front page of the folio a second time, closing it out, and she walked back across the tarmac toward the aircraft in the last of the light. A woman in a plain flight suit, with no rank showing, exactly as she had come. She did not look back at the hangar. She did not text anyone. There was no coded word, no far-off theater waiting, no next mission whispered over her shoulder. There was only a flight line that was safer at sundown than it had been at noon, and a young Marine who would remember why, and a promise 22 years old kept one more day. The last thing she did, at the foot of the ramp, where the whole afternoon had started, was stop and look at the concrete for a moment, the exact patch where a boot had put her down and a Lance Corporal had picked her up. She did not think about Petrie. She thought about Neil Corrigan, the way she always did on a ramp at dusk, and she thought that a man she never got to save had, in a strange, sideways way, just saved a hangar full of people who would never know his name. That was the arithmetic finally coming out a little more even. Not even. Just a little more even. It was the most she ever asked of a day. That, in the end, was all she had ever come for. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.